Hey, it's Tandy with Common Ground Alaska. And I just wanted to give a quick introduction to this podcast because it's definitely a little different from the usual. I had the opportunity to talk with Representatives Kevin McCabe and George Rauscher. George Rauscher is actually the author of this bill that we're talking about, but I talked with both of them about the new farm bill that has passed. There's several points in there that were a little bit confusing. There were some conversations on Facebook that were a little bit misleading. And so I thought it would be best just to go straight to the source and find out what's the reality of this bill? What does it cover? What does it not cover? And I do want to say that I tried really hard to ask the pertinent questions, and sometimes the answers weren't quite as direct as I was hoping, but you can always download a copy of the bill yourself as well and read it over. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. You can reach out to Kevin McCabe, you can reach out to George Rauscher, or your local representative and see if you can't get some answers. There were changes made in the loan programs. Basically, there were probably several changes. The biggest change was that they increased the loan amount for some things. They're just kind of keeping up with inflation. Um, there were some changes in the ability for people to buy processed meat directly from the farmer. So that's definitely one to kind of listen into. Basically, it's like a milk share program, only it's a meat share program. And then finally, there were some changes to the cottage food regulations. I know we didn't cover them all. I know that there are still some regulations out that are not included in this podcast, and I would definitely recommend that you download the not only the bill, but there's also a summary of the bill. They're super easy to find. So I'll actually put the links to those in the show notes. Um, so what I did when we recorded these podcasts is I actually recorded them separately. And then when we edited it, we kind of pieced it together based on the most thorough answers. So sometimes I'm asking a question and Mr. McCabe would answer, sometimes Mr. Rauscher would answer. So it does do some hopping back and forth. They were recorded on separate days. So everything changes in that. Um, and then the last thing that I wanted to say is just that we are not representatives of the bill. And so don't take our information as law. Please know that if you have questions, then there are definitely people to reach out to who are a lot more well versed in this than me. But I am happy to help you work through if you just are trying to figure out what something means. I hope that this information helps you to kind of wrap your head around what this new farm bill does and does not cover. Thank you. So I do want to bring up these two bills that are that affect farmers, and I want to start with the one that has to do with property tax relief because I think it's going to be a little shorter talk, and I think that'll kind of segue into this House Bill 251. So you said that it's CS Senate Bill 179, and can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So early in the session, in fact, I think it started not this year, but last year. So the first session of the 33rd legislature, um, both Senator Bjorkman and Representative Carpenter had these bills that would exempt farm buildings and farmland, would allow the boroughs and cities um, to exempt farmland and farm buildings, outbuildings, and equipment from taxation, should they so desire. And it went through, I think they decided early on that Bjorkman's bill was going to be the vehicle to carry it. It went through the Senate pretty unscathed. It might have had a few amendments I'm unaware of, and it got to the House, and we heard it in Labor and Commerce, which is a committee that I sit on, probably 4 different times. And then it got to rules, and it sort of died, and it had to just have more to do with politics than the real impact or veracity, or if you will, of the bill. It was a political death, and so right towards the end of the session, we took the most important parts of that bill, which it had grown obviously through amendments and that sort of stuff, but we took the important parts out of there, which we felt were probably the best best pieces of it, and that had to do with relieving um, taxes, allowing the boroughs to relieve by ordinance. Actually, now it started out as by a vote of the people, and then it became by ordinance, relieving taxes, provided that the farmer meets some restrictions, and those restrictions are, I think you have to have $2,500 of sales, and it can be used for structures and farm use land that are used for farm operations. Let's see. If you don't sell $2,500 of agricultural products produced from the land during a tax year because of circumstances beyond your control, so you have an accident or something, and you have to sort of stop producing, you're a single single farm. There's some language in there that will give you some relief. I think you also have to file a Form F with the IRS to qualify. So it says a municipality by ordinance may by ordinance partially or totally exempt from taxation farmland and farm structures used exclusively for farming activity or purposes directly related to farming activity if the farmland or farm structure meets the criteria set out in this subsection. The farmland or farm structure must be owned or leased by a person that is actively engaged in farming, and the owner or lessee must sell at least $2,500 of agriculture products produced from the land during the tax year and file an IRS Schedule F with the United States IRS. And then it sort of defines what farming is. It adds aquatic farm products as defined in statute, which we thought was really a good thing, seeing as how there are some kelp farms and that sort of thing that are increasing in popularity with both farmers and consumers. And it also adds in livestock, and it adds in a farming for livestock feed. So it's not just consumables, but it's actually feed for livestock as part of it. So those were the most important parts, we thought, of Senator Bjorkman's bill. And right at the end, it got stuffed into, I think, combined with 4 other bills and stuffed together in a bill called the CS for Senate Bill 179, which is an act relating to municipal property tax, relating to assessment of property, boards of equalization, and certification of assessors. And so all of this had to do with municipal taxes. So we put it all into one bill as a single subject. And it did kind of get hidden from folks, but that's where you go to find it. So I think it's a big step towards helping farmers out. Should the borough and municipality decide to do it, and giving some property tax relief and some structural relief on taxes for farmers, I think it could be a huge thing. So
Okay. So I want to just put this in a much smaller box for just a second, just to kind of make sure that I fully understand it. So so it would give exemptions for your farmland, for some equipment, and farm structures. You have to sell $2,500 a year worth of product, file a Schedule F with your taxes, and you have to own or lease the land
yes.
So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And so I guess I just want to kind of put a real life example to it. So our property is, we have 10 acres. We're taxed on the whole thing, obviously. We have the section where our house is, and that's where, our market garden, or not our market garden, excuse me, our house garden is. I do sell a few things out of that, but the majority of what we sell, then we have a barn, we have several greenhouses, we have our orchard, which is 5 acres. So if we were to apply for this exemption, then it wouldn't just be an across the board sweep of our whole entire property tax bill. It would be like certain sections of our property and how that's valued. Is that right?
Right, and that was the subject of much debate. We wanted to know, what about a person that has a potted plant in front of their house and grows tomatoes in that potted plant, or hanging basket from their porch that grows tomatoes, right? and would that be considered a farm structure? So had much discussion with the various municipalities. Fairbanks was a big one of them. Savannah Fletcher up there was not really a fan of this. She said it would cost the, Fairbanks North Star Borough, I think, $7.5 million in taxes. So we kind of walked this fine line. At one point, it was just had the potential to sell $1,000 worth of products, and at one point it was all the way up to $10,000, and 2,500 seemed to be a number that we could all get around and get to get enough votes to get this passed. So, and the other part of the debate was, well, what is part of a farm structure? Would the home be considered part of a farm structure, right? So that we kind of left up to the borough. And remember, this will have to go through the borough first. They're the taxing body, if you will. We just set in statutes what they're allowed to do with taxes. And so they're going to have to figure out the regulations surrounding this and what they want to do. So all this really does is it's kind of an enabling bill. It just enables the boroughs and cities to do this.
Okay, so although this is passed, it's not necessarily helpful at this point because now boroughs have to decide. So what's the process for that? We're in the Mat-Su borough, could they take 20 years to decide, or so are we still kind of just sitting and waiting?
Yeah, they could. Certainly your borough assemblyman, Bill Gamble, would be instrumental in bringing forward something to the borough to resolve this. The boroughs are all aware that this bill is out there. And, so you could bring something, or he could bring something forward and say, hey, I think we need to do this. It's real similar to when they adjust the mill rate for whatever reason. They could bring forth a regulation and say, hey, we're going to exempt farmer structures and any land that's not used for living, or and figure it out that way. And of course, you would be instrumental in that, probably go to an assembly meeting and testify, that sort of thing. And that's always wonderful when a group of farmers or folks that have a vested interest in what's going on show up there at the assembly and make their voices heard. That's what our government is all about, actually. So
Yeah. So yeah, that makes perfect sense. And so okay, so I want to jump into House Bill 251. First of all, what is the status on this? There's House bills, there's Senate bills, and then the governor signs things into place. So talk for just a second on the process of that and where we are with this 251.
sure. So a House bill is HB simply means that it originated in the House. SB would be your Senate bill, means it originated in the Senate. Oftentimes, there are two bills that are virtually the same, and they go forward in both bodies. And then at some point, depending on how much opposition or how much support there is for a bill, the makers of the bill get together and decide which one they want to be the vehicle to go through. So in this case, HB 251 started in the House. It was George Rauscher's bill, Representative Rauscher's bill, and it was decided to make this the vehicle. Rauscher is a co-chair on a caucus called the Farm and Food Caucus in the legislature. I think there are 30-ish representatives on that caucus, of which I am one. So they decided to push forward with HB 251, the House bill, and run that through the committees. And so a bill like that starts out in the House, it goes through all the committees in the House and then passes the House, and then it goes over to the Senate. The Senate has to pass it as well. And if they amend it at all, it has to come back to the House for what we call a concurrence vote. If they don't amend it, then it just passes to the governor once they pass it. So in this case, I don't remember if HB 251 was actually amended in the Senate. I didn't look that up. It had some amendments done to it on its path forward, especially since the AFPC policy brief that came out in March. It had a few amendments after that and went through, I think, one of the ways to amend it is to make a committee substitute. So if the resources committee, say, or community and regional affairs decided, hey, we like this bill, but we are going to so significantly amend it that we just think we'll do a committee substitute instead. This one actually came out as a CS, a Senate CS committee substitute for House Bill number 251, which actually it was amended, or the Senate amended it in the Senate Labor and Commerce Committee. So that's just a little bit of the mechanics of the way things work. But it was signed by the governor 2 days ago, I think, at the fair. I was there, so the governor signed 3 bills, the 4-H bill and this bill, and the fireworks bill. So it's actually in law now. And I'm not sure if it has an effective date on it or not. I didn't look that deep into it, but if it has an effective date, that's when it will take effect. Oh, it's immediate. So it's some of the sections are immediate. Sections 2, 4, and 6 take effect 1 July 2025. So that's pretty typical when there's some sort of transition needed, or when the department, say, needs to promulgate regulations. So this has sort of the transition part of it has a graduated effective date, but it is signed into law, and it's ready to go. And it's part of the governor's idea and plan, as well as the Food and Farm Caucus, towards taking steps to increase our food production and the ability of farmers to sell food in the state of Alaska. So I think it's a really good bill. Doesn't solve every possible situation, but it does take some good steps, I think, and adjust some loans and that sort of thing for inflation, and so.
Okay. Now I want to talk about the cottage food, because that was a really big source of the conversation that was going on. First of all, I just want to clarify, there used to be a limit where you could, I believe it was gross 25,000, and now you can gross 250,000. Is that right?
Yeah. The it expands the types of homemade foods that may be sold in Alaska, right? And it removes a $25,000 annual income limit to be considered a home producer, and allows home producers to sell items that require time and temperature controls, which is, this was all a pretty big lift. To be able to work with the DEC and find a way to, and I'm not going to use the word skirt, but to work with the parameters that DEC worries about, and the things that they need to worry about, and to be able to find some leeway in there some way. And I think this is an amazing part of the bill that we're able to do. I think there are some concerns, time and temperature, whether you're going to serve things that are hot or things that are needing to be cooked on the spot. Those can spark a hazardous, can spark an inspection should someone call in and say they got sick, or the food they bought they feel was rancid or whatever. Now, if there's enough of those complaints, they can inspect to see and make sure that this is not just somebody that's mad at you. This is somebody that's actually had a bona fide real life experience with the food that they are claiming, and that has to happen for them to, they just can't come in and inspect, which a lot of people are worried, thought that would happen. And it's not, because we have the language in there, which basically builds some sideboards on that.
Okay, so let's go ahead and dig into that for a second, because that definitely was a major concern. If you become, I'm going to kind of regurgitate what you said to make sure that I understand. And then you can add to it if there's stuff that needs added to it. So when it comes to inspections, of course, anybody who's making food for another person needs to understand that they've got to be sanitary. And so what you're saying is that if there is a complaint or if there's an issue saying that someone either got sick and they think it was from your food, or if they maybe saw conditions that were less than sanitary, maybe they came out, like at the farm, maybe they came out to the farm and there were, I don't know, barn cats crawling all over the food. I have no idea. So, but that might be a concern, right? So, so unless a concern has been brought up, then there's not going to be the surprise inspection and the I guess we're all worried about the convoy of Big Brother coming, landing on us, wanting to shut us down. So, and I do understand the balance. I totally get the balance of their job is to keep food safe. And if it doesn't seem as though food is safe, they have to do something. But I guess if you could just clarify just a little bit more, unless there's been a complaint, then we're not just going to get like a bunch of surprise inspections. Is that correct?
Yeah, according to the language, they can't do that. They can't just surprise inspect you because they want to. So if you look, every once in a while you hear, oh, cans with such a date on the shelf and all across America are being recalled, right? Or meat is being recalled from
That's a big one right now.
lower 48 in Texas, right? Or wherever. And I'm not pointing toward Texas. I'm just saying it's an example of something that has happened in the past. So
Right.
these are things that the DEC is not supposed to keep food safe. They're supposed to keep you safe. Okay.
Right.
And then in the end, they're going to make sure that you're keeping your food safe. And that's part of their project. So that's something that I had to come to grips with in the bill, because I didn't really want to talk about that part because I didn't think it existed. But mice droppings, mice urine on cans and stuff like that, people get sick, right? And so it's up to them. Should there be reports? And that's just life. It happens all over America. Things get recalled because people are getting sick and they'll take the entire batch number. And so homeowner beware, make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing right when you're cooking canned foods. Okay. Now I've been told by the DEC that jelly and all that doesn't count because of the way it's actually built or created or packaged or cooked in the way that works with the paraffin. Anyway, so that is not necessary. And honey, all that other stuff is not part of this hazardous food. It's something where the temperature has to be up at a certain temperature to cook the food and can it. That's different. That's completely different. Suppose you don't bring the food up to temperature and you try to can it, right?
Right.
Now we have a problem. So
Okay.
I don't think we're inventing surprise inspections. I think there's a law out there that says this is the DEC's responsibility. And these foods, even though we're giving you free reign with labeling to sell it in the store or wherever, you still have a responsibility to keep your food safe.
Sure. Okay. So that pretty much answers that. And the only foods that would even apply to the whole surprise inspection thing is, number one, it has to be that you have to been reported as either being unsafe or people getting sick from it. And it has to be one of these hazardous foods, which are something that's controlled by time or temperature.
Time and
right?
temperature, correct.
Time and temperature. Okay. That makes sense. Okay. It used to be, I actually wanted to get some ferment from someone. And I had said, can I buy some ferment from you to sell at our farm? And she said, no, because under cottage food laws, she has to be the one direct selling it. So, which makes sense. Until I asked, I hadn't realized that. So my understanding is this changes that. So I could buy ferments from her and sell them at our farm now as a third party seller. Is that correct?
That is a, yeah, I don't, yes. So the answer, the easy answer is yes, provided you meet some of the restrictions. So if you were to put the, and let's just use like a jelly or a honey or something like that, where you have a farmer that has a big berry patch and they're making jelly. The licensing and labeling requirements are less. You could make that, but the shelf requirements, so it has to be clearly, there's certain labels that have to be clearly put on the shelf, um, for that product, if you will, and it really should be separate from other products. And I right now I can't think of anything hazardous or why you would, unless maybe you're selling honeycomb or something like that, and you put it raw on a shelf. I'm not real sure. My wife's a beekeeper, so I'm I sort of focused on bees a little bit because
Okay.
I know how that works. But um, so the short answer is yes, you could resell it.
Okay. So that's huge for cottage food sellers, I would think, because it gives them a whole new opportunity. They don't have to be every place to sell their stuff. They can sell them in retail spaces. I think that's a really big deal. Now, there is quite a bit in here, and I'm not going to go into it, but there's a lot of information with retail spaces. It looks like there has to be a separate cash register. There has to be a bunch of separation. And so I think if anyone's interested, number one, I think it's really up to the producer to make sure that the reseller that they're using is complying with this, because it would be a major bummer to get stuck in the middle of a big tangled mess. So I think it's super important to know this, but also it's important for retailers, if you're considering doing this, to have a full understanding of the bill for sure. So yeah, so nothing is changing at all with milk herd shares, with the raw milk herd shares. Nothing, this wasn't addressed at all in here, so nothing is changing. So I think that's important to point out, because when things shift, you always wonder what's hidden, what do I not know? So basically what you've done is what this bill does is it takes the raw milk herd share concept and it turns it into something that's viable for purchasing meat from farmers. So you would be kind of doing the same thing. You can you can you can get the piece of meat from the farmer. You're part owner of the cow. And so there's not the regulations for processing. Is that right?
Right. So remember a couple of years ago when we had a problem with the USDA approved meat production place over in Palmer, and farmers were saying, even the farmers or the ranchers in Delta were saying, "Hey, what are we going to do now? How are we going?" I can't remember the name of it, but it closed down. It was the only USDA approved meat processing facility, and so our goal was to lower the barriers for Alaskans to be able to buy meat direct from a farmer without having to do the USDA approval um, regulation drill. And um, we felt that was really important for food security, and getting that in place and allowing farmers to increase the size of their herds, because now you can sell direct to consumers instead of having to wait your turn for USDA processing.
So you don't need, so as a farmer, let's say we don't have we don't sell livestock. We grow our own, but let's say we had cows and we want to sell beef. So we can process that beef here on the farm and sell it, just a pound of ground beef, to some random person that comes up to the farm. That's what the new law says.
No, the new law says that that person would have to be a part owner, like a herd
Okay.
share. So you would have to be able to. You have to have, I think, a contract. It has to be in advance. So I couldn't sign a contract 5 minutes before you um, process the butchered and process the cow. It would have to be in advance. Um, So there are some restrictions, no doubt. And part of those restrictions, anytime you look at a bill like this, Tandy, anytime you look through it and you say, well, that doesn't make sense. Like there's some language in there that says comply with any other requirements specified by the Department of Environmental Conservation relating to homemade food. So if you look back up at the top of that, that is subordinate to the clause that says, if a retail space selling a potentially hazardous homemade food is in any way associated with a commercial food establishment, and this is the homemade food portion, not necessarily the meat portion. But my point is sometimes in these bills, you have to insert a clause to get people to vote for it. In other words, there are some folks in the legislature that are very concerned that governments still have a small amount of control. The DEC still have a small amount of control over this. So some of that language is put in there to ensure that we can pass the bill.
Okay.
And then, and then the DEC will see how things work. And in a year or 2 years or 5 years, if we need to relieve some more regulation based on our history, then that's what we'll do. Very slow, very convoluted and complicated process, but that's what it takes sometimes to get 21 votes.
I guess the one thing that I want to clarify is, am I buying a hind quarter or can I buy hamburger?
Either.
Okay, so the farmer can literally process some meat into hamburger, package it, and I can buy that because I own a portion of the share. Or because I own a portion of the herd, excuse me.
Meat's meat, and a rabbit has meat.
Right.
Just
Okay.
just so we clarify what kind of meat we're talking about here, right?
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make sure, I wasn't sure if it was unprocessed, but we can buy unprocessed meat anyway, before. So now this kind of opens things up for the farmer to be able to process his own meat and sell his own meat. And like you said, especially, this time of year, the poor, I can't even imagine owning a butcher shop right now with the influx of 4-H meat and hunters. And I mean, and we're all butchering, right? We're all butchering our pigs and cows. And so, I feel like this is a really big deal. In this meat share thing, does it include chickens and turkeys and game and and domestic birds, or are those under a different? I'm curious what it includes. I'm assuming it would include like sheep and pigs and beef, but what about birds? Or do they have a separate rule?
Okay, so I'm going to read this.
Okay.
Can I read this? Okay, this came from the DEC, and it's animal share semicolon. All right, allows individuals to acquire meat from a producer if they have ownership in the animal or herd without federal inspection. Nothing in the bill removes the current statutory framework for the sale of elk meat. Okay, these are important things, right? Or current statutory authority for the commissioner of the DEC to establish a state meat and poultry inspection program. So what did I get out of that? I believe that that poultry is a part of this.
Okay, that was exactly what I wanted to understand.
But there are regulations on moose. There are regulations on that kind of meat, right? There are regulations on elk or whatever. So those are still in existence and are not the framework around those was never touched by this bill.
Right. Well, this is specifically for livestock, correct? Not wild game. Not that an elk up here would be wild game, but
correct.
Thanks for listening in. I hope this answers your questions. Again, if you have any more questions at all, you can reach out to your local representative. You're welcome to reach out to me, but definitely finding someone to get answers so that you don't inadvertently do something or sell something that shouldn't be sold would probably be pertinent in this case. Thanks for listening.